guys, it's Illuminostic, and before this live stream is over, if you're not already, you will be well convinced that Christianity is the most evil influence to ever integrate itself with the human race. And aside from that, make sure that you stick around for part two, or it may just happen later on in the live stream. But I've actually studied the Bible pretty extensively, and I have had a lot of experience studying the Western mystery tradition and actually taking initiation in different mystery schools. And there are things in the Bible that you will not understand. Like Jesus, I think, said, they will not understand the parables. Of course, every Christian thinks he was talking about someone else. Also, let he whom hath wisdom count the number of a man, and if it's 666. Well, I appreciate you definitely having an open mind. That's much appreciated. That is a reference to gematria, and he who hath wisdom means those initiates that are schooled in gematria and the Kabbalah and these types of spiritual sciences that came to us from the tribe of Judea. Well, Baphomet shouldn't scare you. It's just a glyph of nature. And I mean, this is an anti-Christian video, so I don't know why you'd be surprised to see Baphomet back there. Baphomet is not anything evil to me. Baphomet is just a glyph, an androgynous representation of nature and darkness and light. And the goat has actually been demonized intentionally for a number of reasons. And one of the main reasons is that the devil is basically the god of your enemies in just about every tradition that we can find around the world throughout history. And there have always been bull-headed or horned gods in all of the non-Christian traditions. And so what was an image of virility and nature and sexuality and leaping laughter and fire and force has been converted into a demonic symbol, and also sort of emasculated and transformed into a sheep, which is one of the main themes of this video. Is that the main reason for Christianity in the first place? It was a psyop. Basically, the Roman Consulate. I'm actually going to read you guys the article from. I did have it pulled up. Okay, here we go. Not yet though. Let's wait a second. Let me give you a little bit of background. But it was designed to create pacifists, and over time it was elaborated on by what people call black hats or left-hand path mystery school people. And I hesitate to even call them left-hand path, because they were just basically initiates that had been corrupted and converted to the will of the kings and the ruling elite. And so what started out as just a way to make warriors pacifists eventually evolved into a spiritual system that, in my opinion, this is the most blasphemous thing you can possibly do, to create a spiritual system that is designed to actually curtail spiritual development and genuine gnosis and genuine spiritual development, which is exactly what Christianity and all of the other major religions are designed to do. And they're also, created to make pacifists. And I'm going to show you guys, there's probably stuff here, if you're not Christian and you are smart, you're going to know a lot of it. But there are definitely things that I know about the Bible and some of these hidden secrets and stuff that I would imagine some of you guys haven't heard. And also, the reality is that if you were to read the Bible as if you have no idea what it is, so without prejudice, totally without prejudice, the story that it actually tells has little to do with what people are taught in church and what the average Christian thinks it says. In fact, I can demonstrate beyond a shadow of a doubt that the New Testament is actually about the devil or the Antichrist coming and pretending to be the Savior, and that character is the Jesus of Nazareth character. And the Bible explicitly tells people this over and over and over again. And so I'll show you guys that eventually, so stick around. As far as Jesus of Nazareth being a actual historical character, let's start with that. It's absolutely not true. There's not even a person that he was based upon. There's not one eyewitness record. There's nothing in the annals of the Roman Consulate. And you have to understand that the Roman Empire was very much like the United States of America is now. They had spies watching everyone everywhere, and they were recording everything. They wrote everything down, every arrest, every court trial, every person running around preaching, everything was documented. And there is not one record of a Jesus of Nazareth running around preaching everywhere. There's nothing, okay? So that in and of itself is pretty suspicious. But then in like 2013, a Bible scholar who I believe, don't quote me on this, but I believe he originally had set out to prove that Jesus was actually a historical personage. And what they actually discovered are documents where as I said, the Romans were very, very anal about recording everything. And so when they sat down basically to conspire to create the myth of Jesus of Nazareth, they wrote everything down. There are minutes of the meetings, and they were found not 20 years ago. So, and the guy, Joseph Atwill, he went around England and the United States in October of 2019 and read the papers and talked about what they mean. And so let's take a couple little snippets. He starts it by saying that citizens need to know the truth about our past so we can understand how and why governments create false histories and false gods. They do this to obtain a social order that is against the best interest of the common people. Atwill asserts that Christianity did not really begin as a religion, but as a sophisticated government project, a kind of propaganda exercise used to pacify the subjects of the Roman Empire. Jewish sects in Palestine at the time, who were waiting for a prophesied warrior Messiah, were a constant source of violent insurrection during the first century. So when the Romans had exhausted conventional means of quashing rebellion, they switched to psychological warfare. They surmised that the way to stop the spread of zealous Jewish missionary activity was to create a competing belief system. So that's when the peaceful Messiah story was invented. Instead of inspiring warfare, this Messiah urged turn the other cheek pacifism, encouraged conformity, and even gave the command to give unto Caesar what was due to Caesar, right? You're commanded by God in the Bible to follow the laws of the land and to pay your taxes. And of course, you know, if God is all-knowing, he's not going to set forth rules that you're not capable of following. So if you're a Christian and you go to a land where there's Sharia law, right? How are you supposed to follow the laws of your land and still be a good Christian? But you can't be a Christian at all without breaking the first commandment, and we'll get there. We'll get there, trust me. And so to the question, was Jesus a person from history? And the answer is no. In fact, he may be the only fictional character in literature whose entire life story can be traced to other sources. And once those sources are all laid bare, there's simply nothing left. And so what you can kind of extrapolate that from that in terms of proof is that every single aspect of Jesus can be traced to earlier gods and mythologies and solar astronomical positioning and stuff, you know, the solstices and whatnot. And so once you can trace all of it, it's a very strong indication that this is just a derivative composite myth. It's almost proof. But then actually probably the most damning thing that comes up in these papers is that they mention that they actually used the military campaign of Titus to how would you say, like, to plan his missionary, is that what they call it, or his ministry, excuse me. So everywhere that Jesus stops in the Bible and preaches, and in the same order, follows the exact military campaign of Titus. And so the Romans engineered this thing as a tool to create pacifists, and as I said, over time, it was increasingly engineered to actually curtail real, genuine spiritual development in people that believe it. And this was done a number of ways, but let's talk about the pagan origins of all the stories and why that was done. And this is how you know that somebody that had mystery school training was at work. Because what is required of people that manipulate society, the rulers, the overseers, the engineers of social paradigms, they have to have a more elevated consciousness than the people that they're manipulating, which is not difficult, right? There really isn't. I mean, there's more of a gap between Plato and the average person than there is between an average person and a chimpanzee, right? So, and also the ratio of these much more evolved individuals is very low. So, we're talking about 1 in a billion. Well, there's a range, but the point is that these people that engineered the New Testament and created these systems of control had a very sophisticated understanding of psychology, and they knew about things like anchoring bias. And so once you've established a pattern or a behavior or a belief in the mind, right? This is where habit comes from, but this is also how we how our ontology forms is always informed by the early patterns that were created in our mind. It's not just our habits, but it's our belief systems as well. And so one of the other things that you have to contend with when you're dealing with anchoring bias, which is that you believe whatever you believed first when you're confronted with new information, right? So that's why, and also emotional charge helps to make it stick. So if you're very afraid, when you're given this information, it will stick. That's why with COVID, they gave all the scariest information and all the stuff that they really wanted people to think right away when they were their most afraid. And then if you guys have been watching, no matter what you tell people after they receive this original imprint, they're not trying to hear it, even if it's coming from the same source. So in the CDC, the Center for Disease Control says one thing, and then they say something else later. Anchoring bias is the psychological mechanism that they're pinning their tactics to, basically. That's what's facilitating their ability to do this. And this isn't something that just started. The elites have known how to do this. I mean, if you look throughout history, who was the right-hand man for Queen Elizabeth, Queen Victoria, right? Or even the rulers of the Incas and the Mayans and the Egyptians. It's the magician. The magician is the right-hand man to all of these rulers, and for a reason. Because the shaman, the magician, whatever you want to call them, however you want to think about it, aside from whatever hocus pocus kind of stuff that they might claim, or whatever cultural baggage comes with the idea of magician, any real magicians is basically a shaman, which is a person who has had a breaking down and reformatting of the psyche, and then they were able to do it themselves. So fundamentally, a shaman or a magician is a psychologist, and they are one that goes beyond psychology because they really understand the fundamental nature of consciousness. And so it's very easy for them to figure out how to engineer a religion to fucking control people, right? And so the reason that they took all the pagan holidays is because the people were already conditioned to worship on those days, and it was much easier to integrate a new belief system with the pre-existing one. But I think there is something much, much deeper involved. And I'm of the opinion that Gnosis is real, right? That we can all, as Timothy Leary, Terence McKenna, the Buddha, all sorts of different brainy spiritual characters throughout history have tried to tell us, we can actually remember the Big Bang and maybe before it, everything that's ever happened. Physics even has the zero-point field now, where all of the exchanges of energy are permanently recorded. And so Terence McKenna said it this way: if the truth can be told so as to be understood, it will be believed, which was basically that. He's saying if you can tell people where we came from, what we're doing here, the truth about existence in the universe, which we do know, I believe. It's so mind-numbingly obvious that only mind-numbing because so many don't see it, I guess, But if the truth can be told so as to be understood, it will be believed. And so one of the reasons that people believe these religions so wholeheartedly, and it's so easy to trap them in them, is because they are veiled truths, right? The sun, consciousness is a product of light. It's somehow generated by light. And our consciousness comes from the sun, the closest star. And there are all sorts of different allusions to this throughout, Aleister Crowley's work, the Hermetic tradition. In the Middle Ages and Dark Ages, you had the sun with the smiley face. Sun worship cults all over the planet. This is the real reason why. And consciousness exists, I think, throughout all of time and space. But when you have a sentient being like a human, what you have is a convergence of a density of electromagnetic waves, right, that are intersecting and concentrating. And we perceive a human physical person, but what's really there is a vector of waves, right? And so with great, great, great density and light, you have extremely powerful consciousness, which is why the sun has been worshipped, because it really is sort of the Lord of this world, the light bearer, right? It is, where our life comes from, and our consciousness itself, obviously, is dependent upon the sun, but in my opinion is actually emanating from the sun. Another reason why they used Jesus as the sun, right? So and a pope said this. I can't remember which pope, I wish I could tell you, but one of the popes actually said, the people need the truth veiled in myth. And so this is why it was so essential to retain these pagan practices. It's because pagan practices weren't just bullshit that people do without understanding why, because some church or book told them to. That's religion versus spirituality. There was actually a reason why these rituals and rites and customs existed. There was purpose behind it. They actually did something, and the people knew why they were doing what they're doing. These days, if you go to a Catholic church and you see the fuming incense stencher and a lot of the other, the eating of the wafer and the drinking of the blood, I mean, this is all very much practices that come from different occult traditions that have been integrated into the church. And the thing is that people don't even understand why that incense is burning. Why are they eating the body of Christ? Why are they drinking this blood? People just go through these motions without any actual thought. And so, in a real spiritual tradition, your entire being is engaged. Your consciousness is engaged with every part of the process. And so this disassociation of that connectivity is a huge part of why Christianity is actually an impediment to spiritual development rather than a catalyst. So let's continue though on this theme of like why they draped the truth or a myth on the truth. You know, people know the truth when they hear it, and so that's why they believe it so ferociously, because it's in there, but it's buried in all of this crap and intentional distortions and misleading. But let me just give you another example that is pretty amazing and very revelatory. I actually had an ayahuasca vision a year or so ago, maybe more now, where the zodiac, I was kind of shown how when the universe was created, there was this central emanation of consciousness and light, which we could think of as the unity that was God. And you could think of it as like which direction you emanated from determined like your archetype. And this is exactly the same. This is what the horoscope, the physical, or is that what we call it? The thing around the sun, the zodiac, excuse me. The zodiac is really based on. And of course, Jesus and then his 12 disciples are the sun and the 12 signs of the zodiac. And you know, I've never really gone through and looked in detail to see if the teachers and the people in the Bible actually reflect the different characteristics of the signs of the zodiac, but I wouldn't be surprised. Okay, so, but everybody knows that stuff, right? We all know that they hijacked a bunch of pagan stuff and used it as Christian, or you know, made it Christian, basically. But then, you know, we also should talk about Christian apologists and really putting stuff into perspective. And in order to do this, we have to put our ego aside, and we also have to realize that we are also indoctrinated, brainwashed, that Christianity's bullshit has infiltrated our being, and it has affected our psychology and our psyche in ways that we're generally not even aware of. It comes out in our sexual reality. It comes out in our guilt complexes. Yes, I did hear about mandatory vaccine in Ecuador. Supposedly it's only going to be for a month or something, and then they're going to reevaluate it. But you know, you guys, the New World Order is here, and there's really no question about whether or not it's real. Okay, but let's stay on the subject of Christianity and its evils. And so we all have been affected and influenced by living in a Judeo-Christian society. I never really realized the extent of it until I was using psychedelics for a while, and I started to notice these weird Christian complexes. I realized that I was afraid of the possibility that Jesus, maybe it was all true. You know, that somewhere in the recesses of my mind there were fear complexes that would actually intercede with enjoyment and, you know, certain behaviors, even though I was definitely not Christian. And so a lot of us have this tendency to be apologists for Christianity and say, like, well, if I say, you know, Christianity is evil, people oh no, Jesus is nice and his message is so good and stuff. That does not justify anything. I have no qualms with Jesus telling people not to throw rocks at hookers. That's all good and well. But the reality is that if you don't understand basic ethics and morality, you lack compassion and common sense, not religion. That's not the issue. You don't need Jesus to make you a decent person unless you are a product of a family and or a culture or society that is producing toxic people. You do not need you know, a 1,000-page book full of incest, murder, it approves of slavery, like it tells you how to keep your slaves, and it tells the slaves how they should behave. You know, this murderous God. I mean, look what he did to Job, and we'll get to that in a minute. But what I'm saying here is I think that it's really important for us to really get it through our heads that, I'm sure just about everyone watching this live stream and everyone that will watch the video afterwards agrees that Nazis are bad. But most people would probably think it was extreme to say that Christians are worse than Nazis. But it's absolutely true. And if you look at historical data, the number of people that have been murdered in the name of Jesus Christ, that have been burned alive, tortured, suppressed, beaten to death because they were gay, jailed, all of it together. And we can use the words of Jesus Christ against him in this case, because he said, don't judge a man by his intentions, but by the fruits of his labors. If you judge Jesus and Christianity by that standard, it is the most evil single influence in the entire history of the world. More people have died and been tortured and whatever than all of the dictators in history combined. So when people tell me that it's extreme to say that Christianity is worse than Nazism, it's absolutely worse. And the thing about Nazis is that we have more or less contained their influence. It's mostly in the past, and where it still does exist, it is very actively discouraged, and people will punch them in the face if they see them. But in the case of Christians, they have been conditioned to think that you have to be polite about people's beliefs, even if those beliefs, result in the oppression of entire cultures. Science has been set back, I think it's estimated at least 200 years because of the influence of the church. It's incredible that anyone would be an apologist for Christianity. And it's still actively oppressing. And so let's talk about its tool as a propaganda, or its efficacy as a tool of propagandists, right? Because once you create a precedent in the mind, you have created a physical pattern. And if you create these precedents, the earlier you create them, the more influence they have, right? Patterns, neurological imprints. And so in order to be a Christian, in order to believe in the Bible, you have to accept that it is necessary to live with cognitive dissonance and to use selective perception to engineer your ontological position, your world, your reality is integrated with, it's like making a Swiss cheese chunk out of your reality tunnel, right? So once you have been conditioned to believe in things, even though there are these horrendously obvious contradictions and obvious falsehoods, even if you abandon the religion, you are still going to have the tendency and the capability to hold that kind of ontological position even after you have disregarded the religious belief, because it has shaped your brain physically. And I hope you guys understand that, because it's a really important key to understanding why it is so bad. And I'll give you guys in a minute some examples of how extreme it is. And I promise you, if you haven't thought of these things and you're familiar with the Christian story, you'll feel kind of dumb. I did, because you feel like you should notice these things immediately, but again, you've been conditioned not to. And furthermore, because people's faith takes precedence over logic, over sanity, over ethics and morality even. I think a lot of people undervalue how deeply twisted Christianity makes people, because are people spamming like links or something. I don't understand what this shit is. How really, 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 really bad it is, because we live in a society where people are polite, and you have a mask, a social personality, and especially with the Bible being so prevalent, Christianity being so prevalent in the South, which is where what else runs amok? Racism, ignorance, cousin fucking, I mean, that's not a coincidence. Don't kid yourself. But I have been in prison with Christians. I grew up in a very, very redneck, southern, surrounded by complete pieces of shit, basically. And they were all diehard Christians, but the biggest pieces of shit in the world, every single one of them. Racist, stupid, just it's violent towards women and animals and they're awful, fucking awful. And you think that Christianity is supposed to actually prevent that, but it actually encourages it. And I'll give you a couple of examples. Let's actually not from my life, but from like the conquistadors or the witch burning crusade. You guys know how to tell if a woman is a witch? The whole duck floating thing from Monty Python. I'm not going to go over the whole scene, but that's pretty much an accurate representation of the logic of these people. But what is believed, the reason that people can light another person on fire alive, because they believe they practice something that was forbidden by the Bible, is that they believe that God is going to torture you for all of eternity anyways. So what difference does it make if the torturing starts now? And most people kind of take for granted that Christians stopped thinking like that back in the 1500s or whatever, but it's not true. Trust me, I've been around them. Like, if they're comfortable enough in the South to actually be real with you, they'll tell you that they have no qualms torturing someone to death that isn't Christian. And like those people are actually Christians are the main reason why I would be afraid of the rule of law disappearing. Because most people are actually decent just because they're decent, right? And but it gets worse. It gets way worse. Another Christian, and this is just one example, I've heard this from numerous Christians, he beat someone almost to death with a tire iron, and I asked him, if you're so Christian, how can you beat someone to death with a tire iron? And he said, that's why I can beat someone to death with a tire iron. I can do anything I want, and Jesus will just forgive me. So, and then we can keep rolling with this toxic psychology that has permeated the Western world, with its roots in Christianity even more. Because if you think about the idea that someone else needs to suffer for your pleasures, it's not your responsibility. Someone else is going to feel all of the pain. They're going to pay for you, right? You are taught at the deepest level of your being that actually makes sense. That not only is that correct, but it's willed by God that it should be this way. It's a divine ordinance that someone else should suffer so that you can prosper. And now we have the Western world standing on the backs of all of South America and Asia and all of these there's more slavery in 2021 than there ever has been before in the history of the world. And a lot of it is because Christians have no guilt about the suffering of a non-Christian, because they're just supposed to suffer for all of eternity. And it's true that a lot of them, the really fundamentalist ones, really actually feel this way. And of course, when they speak in public, you can't be deceived by that. People know that they want people to like them, that they're supposed to regurgitate the shiniest, happiest parts of the Bible and stuff, but they don't mean it. Trust me, they don't mean it. And some of them do. It's impossible to make absolute blanket statements about everyone. But then continuing on the propaganda theme, they continue to be useful to the elites and the governments because they're already conditioned to believe obviously stupid shit, right? Like, faith is our ability to believe that which we know to be untrue, basically. And so these people have been conditioned to believe things that are obviously retarded, right? And so, flat Earth, obviously the stupidest thing ever in the history of the universe. But what is the utility of it for a propagandist? Now, with all of this evil shit going on that people have noticed, right? 9/11, why did Building 7 just fall down? Why is it that the conspiracy theorists predicted, 30 years ago that they were going to be microchipping people with a vaccine? This is a really old story. Way before any of the technologies were even hinted at. You know what I mean? So my point is that there are real conspiracies. But you can convince almost everyone that conspiracy theorists are all idiots because of Christians believing stupid shit and associating themselves with these alternative narratives. So, at every turn in Western society, what you run into when you're trying to figure out what is wrong, why are people oppressed? Why are there people in jail for psychedelic drugs for decades, kids, that were locked up at age 20 that are being released now at age 46 for a little bit of LSD that they didn't even sell, because of the influence of Christian ideology. All of the tolerance of control, the tolerance of racism, because they're heathens, they're lower beings, there's no reason to have pity on them because God is not going to pity them. So, there's plenty more. By the way, do me a favor, hit the like button, share, subscribe. It's Christmas. If you want to send crypto to support us, we have a wallet address. We have the PayPal and Zelle for cash. It's Christmas. Shut the fuck up, Illuminati. Listen to yourself. But seriously, we don't get any money from YouTube. So I always ask you guys every time to support us. I'm also working on this incredibly healing tea that I made in the Amazon. This is almost it right here. This is what I'm drinking. There's a little bit of ayahuasca leaves, mono de rabo, uña de gato, guayusa. There's a ton of stuff, and I'll explain it all in the video. So make sure you check that out. And then there's the demonization of symbols. There's the demonization of consciousness itself, which is what the Genesis story of the snake and the serpent. People think that it's about the demonization of nature, but it's actually about the demonization, literally the demonization of consciousness, of the light itself. Man. But okay, so symbols, right? You draw a pentagram, the Christian's like, oh no, that's an evil symbol. No, it's not. It's a symbol of protection that was used by Christians until the 3rd century. But when they realized that these symbols actually have power to communicate with our consciousness, right? Just the observation of them has the power to catalyze a change in consciousness. So they have demonized everything that could contribute to that process. Again, Christianity is the anti-spiritual religion. I mean, look where it's so popular, all the most materialist places in the world. Okay, so let's talk about Genesis and the demonization of consciousness. There's a whole lot to unpack here, but so when Jehovah shows up in the Garden of Eden and he's wandering around, first of all, Jehovah is not a guy. Jehovah is not male. Jehovah is like a masculine form of a feminine plural. I mean, not Jehovah, Elohim, excuse me. They also use the term Elohim when Jehovah's wandering around. Or are they talking about somebody else? And by the way, you guys, as people that don't read this stuff in Hebrew, you don't even see this. It just says him, or Jehovah or God. But if you were actually reading it in Hebrew, you would see that, we had all these different names. Tetragrammaton, which is, by the way, why you're not supposed to use four-letter words, in case you should accidentally pronounce the name of God and destroy the universe. And Elohim is, this androgynous collective that's running around the Garden of Eden. And then we have, I don't know if a Heye is used in Genesis. The Shekinah, I'm pretty sure, is used in Genesis, which is basically the female aspect of God. So we have all of these different gender pronouns being applied to God in the first book of the Bible, and most Christians would tie you to a fucking stake and light you on fire for trying to tell them that, right? But, oh, and by the way, it is the absolute word of God, not a letter has been changed, even though you can't translate ancient Hebrew into English very well at all. But it's the word of God, right? Can't translate it directly, but it's exactly the word of God. So, where are we at with all this? Okay, so, Adam and Eve, there's an ayahuasca vine and some choliponga. Actually, it would be Syrian rue and acacia. And so Jehovah says, hey, don't mix up the Syrian rue and the acacia, because you're gonna know, you'll be like God, you'll be like Elohim, and you will know as Elohim. And apparently, God is the type of person that would threaten you with death if you don't choose to remain in ignorance, right? That's definitely the first sign that I have of a benevolent God, right? Remain ignorant. Don't eat of the tree of knowledge of good and evil, or verily thou shalt die, right? And I want to mention at this moment, I was talking to a friend from Israel, and we were talking about the Old Testament, and he mentioned that when Moses, before he encounters the burning bush, a lot of people have this fucked up. People think the burning bush might have been acacia or something, where they breathe DMT smoke, which is completely dumb. That would never ever get you high. So that's just not even, it's not even clever. It's nothing. But God tells Moses, I don't know the word, but he told me the word, and he said it basically means to make drugs. So it really does sound like there was probably some practice of, I would assume, Syrian rue and acacia in that part of the world to make a psychoactive beverage in order to, oh, and here is the real kicker with that. Moses was trained in the mysteries in Egypt, and it's believed that he may have traveled to Greece and taught them to Pythagoras, and this is where, the rest of the mysteries descended from, so the Eleusinian mysteries and the Freemasonry and all of this kind of stuff. And so the mysteries involve drinking some kind of psychoactive beverage. And so here we have Moses making some kind of psychoactive beverage and then talking to God in a burning bush, right? But let's go back to the Garden of Eden and the story of Genesis, because this is just buckets of fun. Okay, where were we? So Jehovah says, don't eat of the tree. Don't eat of the Syrian rue and the acacia. And the serpent comes along and he says, you should actually consume that, because you will know as Elohim knows, and verily thou shalt not die. And so Adam and Eve, everyone knows the story, they took a bunch and tripped balls, and they're like, oh my God, we are eternal. All this pain is an illusion. Light is, generated by consciousness, and you know what I mean? They knew everything that everyone that takes a big dose of plant medicine knows in like 10 minutes, right? We are sensory organs of the universe. We are eternal. Like, it's pretty simple. And everybody fucking knows it on some level, and this is, another reason why Christianity is so goddamn evil. The point of our life is to be hedonists, basically, to enjoy all things of sense and rapture, and fear not that any God shall deny thee for this, right? So to believe, to be taught that your duty in this world is to do almost nothing and just grovel before God, is just such an injustice to divinity. It's satanic in the most literal sense, to oppress people's experience and limit with the parameters of the experience that's available to them. And I'm probably not going to do 2 parts, man. I kind of want to because it's going to be really long, and I know people that watch later won't watch this far, and this is like the best stuff. But I guess those of you that like stick with me should get the biggest rewards. Anyways, so they drink the stuff, right? And then they know, as Elohim knows, and Elohim comes back and he's like, what? You know, what did you guys do? And, but what happened? Who lied? Jehovah lied. The serpent told the truth. And so, you don't even make it past the first chapter of the book before what the book actually says and what is taught from the pulpit is completely turned on its head. Right? Because almost everyone believes that the opposite of what actually happened in that story is what happened. And so that kind of sums up the whole, the whole essence of Christianity and what it does to people. So we have, so far, the greatest suppressor of science, of sexuality, of human freedom, cause of incarceration, death and torture, number one in all of those things throughout human history. This one single influence. And, I just want to reiterate that, no, you should not just respect people's beliefs or whatever it is that you don't need to be polite. We need to stop doing that. The thing that we need to understand is that in our society, everything that we have been doing is wrong, all of it. So we have to change all of it. If people's beliefs are so stupid and destructive that they have the kind of tidal wave tsunami of horrible torture and horror, if that is the effect of these beliefs on the rest of mankind, you have an obligation to tell people that their beliefs are not only wrong, but that they're fill in the blank. I mean, you can go on and on with that, with Christianity. And so, rather than doing 2 parts, I'm just going to, I'm going to tell you guys the craziest shit here at the end. And so, if you are a mystery school adept, or if you have just studied the Western occult traditions, if you are not among the profane, is another way that people like to say it. There are lots and lots of things in the Bible that you will understand that most people, that, if you haven't studied this stuff, you're not going to know it. And so, really, 2 people tuned out right as we're getting to the penultimate climax of this thing. And I'm pretty tired though, so let me get this to you, and then I'm gonna check out. If you read the Bible as if you don't know what it is, a very, 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 very different story emerges. We just lost the lights. I guess we'll live. And it starts in the book of Exodus. I don't know what vast tech is. Yeah, of course I feel like people are hopelessly lost. But no, I don't think that we are actually. I mean, it depends on what you mean, collectively or individually. No, I don't think that. I don't think that we are. I think that what it actually is that people don't have access to the tools that they need to really catalyze the process of gnosis and the guidance that you need to actually get it done. And one of the biggest problems is that there is the profit motive integrated into, spirituality has become an industry. And so most people are not going to risk losing a client to tell them the things that they really need to hear in order to really grow. It's this thing of being polite and putting your business before your real work, I guess, before putting the money first. But no, I think that, we do know the truth about where we come from, why we're here. Consciousness is... the consciousness is the organizing principle. I don't think it is that difficult. There's consciousness, and there is energy, and consciousness is like the organizing principle that imposes symmetry and order upon the chaotic energy, and that's where we get form, and it does so by means of electromagnetic waves. That's its mechanism of action, and you can just go on from there. I mean, I made videos where I explain this in greater detail, but I think we have actually gotten to the point where our science and our spiritual knowledge, under the right circumstances, has converged, and it's what Terence McKenna was saying. When the truth can be told so as to be understood, it will be believed. Of course, there are limits to our knowledge, I think, but. No, I don't think hopelessly lost, and I think we can, to the extent that it's possible to know things, actually know the truth. So, but let's talk about the shit in the Bible that people don't get. And the first one is way less horrifying than the later stuff, so let's start there. In the book of Exodus, that's when the Ark of the Covenant comes down out of the sky, and it's described as a metal tent, right? And, when I started studying Jewish mysticism and Kabbalah and all that, I noticed really quickly that there was something to it. It's not just woo or whatever. It's the Jews met something in the desert, but I don't think it was God, and I don't think it was a demon either. I think it was a UFO with an alien in it. Or it's just a fictional story, but hear me out here. So this metal tent is flying around, and it comes down, and they describe it hovering above the desert. It actually blows up like groups of enemies, tribal enemies. If you make the thing inside mad, only one guy is allowed to see its face, right? And if you make it mad, you have to come and stand behind the tent, and it turns the flames on and incinerates the person. If you were the tribe of Judea wandering around the desert, and a UFO came down and landed amongst you, that's how you would describe it, I think. And to further sort of support that idea, it knew about bacteria, spreading diseases, like all of this stuff that shouldn't be in the Bible. And people will point out that and say, well, there's proof that it was written by God. No, it's proof that maybe the tribe of Judea met a guy in a UFO that was flying around blowing shit up, and a metal tent that incinerates people. And there's also a note about how they are to follow the flames at night and the smoke trails by day. I mean, come on, this is something flying around and they're following it. So that is the one. That's the first one that really hit me. Like, if you're reading the Bible as if you don't know what it is, that sounds like an encounter of a tribal people with a UFO to me. I mean, okay, so, but then here's where it really starts to get mind-blowing. The book before Jesus returns, right? John, who's kind of his teacher, says, he warns that Satan may come as an angel of light. Like 45 pages later, Jesus shows up saying that God is his Father and that he is the light. Now wait a minute, weren't we just warned that a false prophet would come saying he was the light like 45 pages ago? Like, how short is your memory? Like, what the fuck kind of drugs are these people on? They were just warned that exactly that would happen almost like just in the last book. So that's pretty goddamn crazy. That's really crazy. But then there's also this. The first commandment, thou shalt have no other gods. It doesn't have a caveat, until my son comes. Right? There's no other gods. So you cannot be a Christian in the sense that you believe that Jesus is a manifestation of God and call him by a different name without breaking the first commandment. So you've already committed blasphemy when you've accepted Jesus into your heart, who's out there knocking like, hey, you need to let me in so I can save you. And you're like, from what? And he's like, from what I'm going to do to you if you don't let me in. I mean, so he's got to send himself to us so he can kill himself in order to save us from himself. Because, you know, if you are the grand architect of the universe that has orchestrated consciousness and matter and energy and all of these things to work in this grand symphony of just majestic impossibility, you have overturned the improbability factor of creation that was so staggering against the possibility that it could happen at all. And you're so irrational that you would go through this crazy ass bullshit and then torture it. I mean, come on. But let's stay on track here. So you can't be a Christian without breaking the first commandment. The second commandment, you shall have no graven images, no pictures. All those pictures of Jesus, crosses, all of that shit are also blasphemy. And then there's another warning. Beware a sheep and lamb's clothing. I think that was also John. Wait, a wolf in sheep's clothing. You mean the lamb? Is that the wolf in sheep's clothing? You mean the angel of light that we were warned about? Like a chapter before the angel of light showed up? That it could be Satan? Disguised as an angel of light? And then there are two times when morning star, or Lucifer, is used in the Bible. The first one is in Ezekiel. It says, how has fallen from heaven, bright and shining morning star. You know where else it shows up? Jesus says, I am the bright and shining morning star. But the Old Testament and the New Testament are in different languages. So you would not notice that the morning star appellate has been applied twice, right? Also, when the Savior returns at the right hand of God, it's not Jesus, it's Lucifer, the morning star, or it is Jesus and he's the morning star. Either way, why is this one name used for both of these personalities that are supposed to be completely opposed? And more importantly, why does almost no one notice that? Especially the people that are actually following it. And this is what I mean about conditioning these people to hold cognitive bias and cognitive dissonance as a fundamental feature of their ontological interface, right? But there's more, of course there's more. I'm just trying to recall it all off the top of my head. I haven't really thought about some of this stuff in a while. You shall have no other gods before me. Oh, okay. So, in numerology, the number 9 is, its functionality is to reveal the essential truth of something. And the reason is that the truth is always the truth, right? It does not change. It is self-substantiating. It is true, right? So 9 times 9 is 81, and 8 plus 1 is 9. So no matter what you do with the truth, it always becomes the truth again. So in one type of gematria, gematria is the Hebrew science, really, I guess, of adding the numerical value of letters together to find correlating numerical values in other words and phrases in order to reveal deeper connections. And I was pretty skeptical about this, but I've had a couple of experiences with it that were so specific that I just, it's just really, real quick, I'll tell you one of them. I know I've told the story a few times on my channel, but some of you may not have heard it. I had chronic fatigue syndrome, I still do. I smoked DMT one time and it totally went away. And my friend had just discovered a gematria calculator. So I just on a hunch went into his room and I typed N-dimethyltryptamine into the gematria calculator, and the only phrase in the database that was the same was cure for chronic fatigue syndrome. And that was a jaw dropper, you know what I mean? And that's not the only one. I have a few stories like that are, but that's the craziest one. Could be an astronomical coincidence, but here's the thing about this. In the book of Revelation, it says, let he whom hath wisdom count the number of a man, right? And if it's 666, this is the Antichrist. Well, it turns out that Jesus Christ, Messiah, and serpent, added together in Hebrew and then multiplied by 9, are all 666. I don't know why my screen's frozen. Okay, there, I'm back, I guess. If you guys have any questions or input, I'm trying to think, like, I know I missed stuff. I wish I'd started this later for those of you that were dialing in. I feel like there's a lot of really important content.